surfer's paradise for the best part of the year, but today it is a surfers and beachgoers' nightmare. Now what we're seeing is the waves breaking dangerously close to the coastline, resulting in erosion. And not only that, near gale force winds have stirred up the sea into a washing machine, and it's basically dumped a whole mass of foam and dirt right across the beach. It is an extremely bizarre scene. I've covered flooding rains through the outback, I've seen damaging winds, I've done heat waves, and I've done unseasonal snowfall. But this is something like Armageddon. It almost gives me the same sort of energy and feeling that we got from the dust storms when something so normal was transformed into something so bizarre.
It was quite remarkable, the transition. We went from El Nino to La Nina rapidly through autumn of 2010. By winter, the La Nina through the Pacific Ocean was well established, and most northern and eastern parts of Australia were already seeing well above average rainfall. It strengthened further through the spring, and in fact the second half of the year was Australia's wettest on record. Now, one of the ways we measure the strength of a La Nina is called the Southern Oscillation Index, and that measures the difference in pressure between Tahiti, the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and Darwin, in the northern part of Australia. Now, that value averaged plus 21 through that period from August to December. That was the highest average value there since 1917.
By late 2010, the onset of La Nina was well recognised. Record rains fell. But what concerned meteorologists was a second system developing over the tropical Indian Ocean.
When we've got warm water near Australia, that's the La Nina situation. That tends to promote tropical air coming down through Australia and increase rainfall for much of eastern and central Australia, which of course we've seen. When you get warm water on the Indian Ocean side, that also creates a situation where cloud develops there and tends to carry across Australia. So we've had both operating at once during 2010 and both acting in tandem.
The sea surface temperature patterns across the equatorial Pacific Ocean were in what meteorologists call a La Nina phase. The Indian Ocean equivalent of La Nina is called the negative Indian Ocean dipole. This occurs when the equatorial Indian Ocean is warmer on the Australian side than the African side. If this happens at the same time as La Nina, Australia's moisture feeders are working overtime.
Both of these climate patterns lead to above average rainfall happening at the same time. You get flooding across the country.
There was also a third influence, the monsoonal trough that generated record floods in Pakistan and China. And this will be making its annual migration south for a summer rendezvous with Australia.
We were looking at the events in Pakistan and China with some concern about the middle of 2010 because there was always going to be a chance that that trough would maintain its intensity as it moved back towards us, which it did.
When all these weather systems combined, Australia was a sitting duck.
As a meteorologist, this is something that I find particularly amazing because we've got two juicy climate patterns happening at the same time. A negative Indian Ocean dipole and a La Nina, both leading to warm sea surface temperatures that bring above average rain. And we haven't seen both happening at the same time in over 30 years.
We had a warning from the Weather Bureau in October that was so dire, I thought the whole cabinet needed to be briefed. Warnings about La Nina and the monsoonal activity, and warnings that what we were seeing was a confluence of weather patterns that we hadn't seen since the early 1970s. The Bureau warned us that we could see up to 6 cyclones across the coast during our wet season. In addition to that, we could expect monsoonal rain in places that would bring severe flooding. We knew we were in for a difficult season, but what came even surpassed those warnings.
Weather day right across the nation, and we are expecting that rain to continue over the next few days.
Yes, flooding isn't the only major concern across eastern Australia. It's the severe thunderstorms that are going to affect South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland later this afternoon. Queenslanders too experiencing.
We just had one rain event after the other.
With showers and storms expected into tomorrow yet again.
Farmers were looking towards bumper crops. It looked tremendous. We had the crops looked in great condition, grain crops across New South Wales, for instance, bumper crops. And then, of course, we got to the stage where the farmers couldn't get in to harvest it because it was just too wet. And then it just kept on raining after that, and then we started getting reports of widespread crop ruin, where the crops were just dying and rotting in the ground.
The poet Dorothea McKellar wrote of her love for our sunburnt country, of droughts and flooding rains. With the farmers of the wheat belt in New South Wales, there's little love for the rains of 2010. In December, the rural hub of Wagga Wagga was drenched.
Well, for many farmers through the southeast of the country, it was a cruel blow because they've seen 10 years of drought in many areas, and then finally heavy, consistent, widespread rains turned up with the strong La Nina through 2010. But then towards the end of the year, as this La Nina continued to strengthen, we ended up seeing widespread floods. Many of the crops were destroyed.
The rain that everybody was dreading has just arrived in Wagga, New South Wales, and it's been coupled with severe thunderstorms. It feels like pins literally going against your body. You can hear the thunder booming across the town, and considering that it's already flooded, this sort of rain is going to lead to worse flooding than we even saw last week.
What happens with La Nina, the tropical influence tends to extend much further south than normal. During an average type year, we do get tropical influence, of course, very much over Queensland, the Northern Territory, getting down into northern New South Wales. But during La Nina, what tends to happen is that tropical influence gets much further south than normal. We get high moisture tropical air coming right down into New South Wales, Victoria, even Tasmania.
The tragedy of seeing their cash crops, not to mention their hopes and dreams, ruined under hectares of water, was too much for some farmers.
Drought is one of the hardest things I've been through, but I got through that. It didn't how do I say, destroy me like this flood has. Because water is the most powerful force of Mother Nature, and boy, I'll never ever go through this again. It's hard, real hard. Getting at me. But yeah, it's not easy.
Up north, Queensland was awash.
Thanks for staying with us live on the Weather Channel as we continue our comprehensive coverage of the Queensland flood crisis. You'll notice more heavy rain on the way today, with widespread cloud cover all the way from the northwest right down to the southeast. Amazingly, this is actually
On December the 24th, a tropical low developed off the coast of Cairns. 24 hours later, Christmas Day, it was upgraded to Tropical Cyclone Tasha. It created widespread rain.
There's been a wild end to 2010 with widespread heat for the south through the north. It's been all about flooding rains. To talk about this more, let's go to the Weather Channel's senior meteorologist Dick Whittaker. Dick, you couldn't really ask for two more weather extremes.
We have major flood peaks travelling down several big Queensland river systems, and that's going to be an issue now for at least the next week or so.
Take a look at the last 7 days' rainfall. It's been record-breaking stuff in many areas of the state.
Yes, it has, and you can see widespread falls in excess of 150 millimetres there on that chart, extending all the way through eastern Queensland up to the top end of the Northern Territory. That's very, very tropical, that set up there, and of course that's generated all the heavy rain we saw across Queensland. We were getting surges of tropical air coming right down into Queensland on quite a frequent basis, not just one or two events. We were getting one event after the other, and high humidity tropical air coming right down into central Queensland, and that was just generating one rain event after another, and that once again is the classic signature of what is the La Nina.
Theodore cotton grower Peter French lives by the weather. He determines how much and when he plants and when he sows.
The weather dictates what we do, how we farm. The only thing consistent about their weather is its variability.
On Christmas Day, this is the sight that greeted him. Cotton will survive if any of the plant sits above water.
Holy.
He took to his boat to save his cotton. And Joe, his dog. Joe made it. The cotton didn't.
I guess we were satisfied that we didn't go down without a fight, and we did everything we possibly could to save it. And after spending about 4 weeks, night and day, in sandbagging and excavators and everything else, it was probably a relief when it finally all went. There was nothing else we could do.
Theodore's Dawson River peaked at 14 metres, flooding the town. Elsewhere in central Queensland, other rivers began to break their banks. The last time anything like this had been seen before was 1974. Also a year of La Nina.
The intensity and the speed of the whole event was certainly quite amazing. It was outside my experience. The events in some of the areas such as Rockhampton and Emerald, they were probably just as bad, if not worse, than 1974.
There was no doubt that it had been a long time since we'd seen whole towns under that kind of water. Rockhampton was the largest city that was impacted, but we saw it in places like Dalby and Chinchilla. We evacuated a whole town for the first time in our history, the town of Theodore. The town of Condamine evacuated twice in a matter of weeks. Emerald and a lot of smaller places. I've never seen anything like it. It was the largest expanse of water. I don't have any other description for it other than an inland sea. It spanned an area as big as the countries of France and Germany combined. These are areas that are normally cattle grazing areas, so they're pretty tough country. A lot of brown dirt. Most you're ever going to see out there is cattle and people droving. And here it was, people going around it in a tinny.
Amongst those in a tinny was Kay Kelly, her dog, and her Elvis impersonator husband Sid. They live on board a boat on the Fitzroy.
Oh, there's water everywhere. So the water come up to about here, up to the top of this.
And we used to take a dinghy across here.
So I just used the dinghy to come across.
The unexpected result of the floods in Rockhampton was the animals displaced into water, especially the snakes. Much to Kay's horror.
And Sid's yelling at me, grab the rope, grab the rope. And so he was down one end of the dinghy and I'm off the bow, and I grabbed the rope that we had hanging here, a big thick rope, and as I grabbed it, this thing was all moving, and I thought, God, this rope's got fat. And then I looked, and here's this coloured snake banging at me, and it dropped clean down, and I'm sitting, oh, it's on me left. And he said, don't panic, and I said, quick, get rid of it, and it's going.
It's a good thing we're able to joke about these things in the retelling. It's a natural survival reaction, but at the time, the flood dealt a deep psychological blow.
Many residents in Bundaberg are angry that they haven't received much help or communication from the Mayor's office, the council and also emergency services. But when you think about it, it is a logistical nightmare. The area that is affected by flooding in Queensland is the size of New South Wales.
When you're talking about whole businesses and that have gone completely under and people losing their homes, speaking to some of those residents, you do get overwhelmed with emotion because, you know, they may be alive, but they've lost everything. they've run a gym or a bakery, a butchery or something like that, and they've just run that their whole lives, and they're completely flooded, and they don't know what is going to happen next.
Of course, there is an upside for farmers like Peter French to the flooding. The sodden ground will maintain moisture for bumper crops next season, as long as there's no major flooding then as well. But for now, the rains haven't finished, and the whole of Queensland is about to be tested.
Nothing short of extraordinary in terms of rainfall across Queensland. Not only is this unseasonal, it is highly unusual. Queenslanders have just come off the back of their wettest September on record, and not only that, the dry season has been virtually non-existent. But I can talk about records and statistics all day long. It's not until you're standing here, not in front of a waterfall, but in front of Wivenhoe Dam, that you can grasp just how big this rain event really is for Queensland.
January 2011. Queensland is reeling from its worst floods in living memory, shutting down whole towns and forcing evacuations in the central part of the state.
What we've seen over the past 9 months is a very strong La Nina through the Pacific Ocean. That means that temperatures through the central part of the Pacific Ocean are well below normal, but off the northern coastline of Australia, they're much warmer than normal. And that sets up quite a few weather patterns. One, you have much stronger trade winds, so stronger easterly winds pushing across the northern part of Australia. So all the moisture in the Pacific Ocean gets pumped over northern and eastern Australia, which enhances rainfall. It also lowers the pressure through the northern part of Australia. That also increases rainfall. And just because the waters are warmer than normal, you also see increased evaporation, so there's more moisture in the air, and that also leads to an increase in rainfall.
Here in the studio, we're sort of trained that anything over 30 millimetres in an hour is going to set off an alarm bell. Out on the road, if you were driving along, we've all been in that situation where the rain is so heavy you have to pull over for 10 minutes, but that's 10 minutes. When it's 60 millimetres in an hour, that's an hour that you have to stay pulled over on the side of the road because you just can't see through your windscreen.
In the Rockhampton district, more than 280 millimetres fell in 4 days. Further west, nearly 120 millimetres fell on Emerald in 1 day.
Flooding is very much an event that's produced not just by the rain at the time, but the lead up to the whole event. And the worst floods are always after the catchments are totally saturated. And when they're saturated, any water that falls after that, it only runs off. Nothing goes into the ground. So we're in that situation after Tasha, and we knew that we were going to be in trouble with southeastern Queensland because everything was totally saturated.
The wet season had only just begun and rainfall was already well above average. Catchments were overflowing, the ground soaked. The stage for catastrophe was set.
For the period from late November to early January, we saw massive rain through the eastern part of Australia. There were 6 major rain events, so the catchments were completely saturated through southeast Queensland. Then what we saw was a very moist onshore airstream flowing into an upper low pressure system that was sitting above the atmosphere. And that was almost the perfect storm for more heavy rain that was going to fall. So in the second week of January, we saw widespread falls of more than 200 millimetres over southeast Queensland.
On the 8th of January 2011, heavy rain began to fall in Brisbane and its surroundings, including the rural region west of the city, Toowoomba and the Lockyer Valley. In just 3 days, more than 230 millimetres fell on Toowoomba alone. Then, when locals thought it couldn't get any heavier, on the 10th, the heavens opened.
100 millimetres of rain in 1 hour. What would that feel like? Now, if you can think of the heaviest thunderstorm you've ever seen in your life, and you were standing outside in that for 1 hour, the thunderstorm didn't move for 1 hour, that's what 100 millimetres of rain feels like in 1 hour. Guaranteed to produce flash flooding.
David Judson witnessed the beginnings of a disaster from his office window.
Monday the 10th of January, it was the first day back. There was just torrential rain as I watched it, it came to a level that I'd just never seen before. And that's when I got my camera out and started to film.
Oh, that's unbelievable. There's another one. Gone.
You don't start out thinking that you're going to be documenting history. But that day I did.
Whoa.
The volume of water that came and the strength and power that it had, it just literally picked up the cars and dragged them away.
Oh, that is horrible.
I'm incredibly thankful that what we saw was just a car park. These were empty cars. In other areas of Toowoomba, there were people in those cars.
For situations like Toowoomba, you're looking at just a little spot of black on a radar that's not moving. That's the other thing, you know, radar, rain moves, it moves on, it travels. But in the case of Toowoomba, it just sat there for like an hour, 2 hours.
The official figures given out by the Bureau were 60 millimetres in an hour, but we believe, just looking at the amount of rain and the wall of water that came through Toowoomba, and also some informal conversations we had from people over the phone, from viewers, we think there was probably rainfall of up to 100 millimetres an hour between the official rain gauges.